effective these therapeutics are.
Yeah, don't get me started with scientific communication. I mean, it is needed more than ever. Oh my goodness. And you're right. I mean, the vaccines have saved more than 2 million lives in the United States. The COVID-19 vaccines have saved more than 2 million lives in the United States. And that's one of the challenges with public health, is that when it works, it's invisible, right? We don't really think about when a seatbelt saves your life because it prevented it. We don't really think about a secondhand smoke, lung cancer was prevented because we don't see it. So I think that's a really big challenge of public health, is to show that too. And it's just not something you necessarily see, like when you're getting surgery, for example. You see that immediate effect.
Yeah, and another thing I notice is some parents will say, well, children are not impacted as much from COVID as adults. They don't get as sick as adults. But what I say often is, well, children shouldn't die, and COVID is in, the top causes of death, last year for children. So that is this is a problem. And then also, if someone told you that, wearing a seatbelt or putting your child in a seatbelt in a car is going to make your child safer, right? And say that probability is not that much more safe, even though we know it is, wouldn't you do everything for your child to make your child safe, right? Even if it's not significantly, maybe it's moderately, yeah, you would absolutely do that. So that's how I think about a lot of things, in life in terms of protecting my children. I want to do everything that I can to put those layers of protection around my children. So when the vaccine was first approved for their age group, I literally that day, I said, we're going, put your coats on. We are out of here, get into the car.
I was equally excited because you're right. It is a top 10 leading cause of death, and now it's preventable. And so I am going to do everything I can to get that prevention, and even if it is a little smaller than other causes of death. I will say, though, Dr. Blackstock, and I don't know if other parents with kids under 5, I had a really tough time accessing vaccines. And that really worries me because, like you said, I'm very educated, and I feel like I can look at the internet pretty well. And I couldn't find a place for my girls to get vaccinated. It took me about 2 weeks. And so it's a big concern of mine, especially over that summer. And I think that's where schools can come in too, but would love to hear your thoughts.
No, I absolutely agree. Actually, the reason why my kids are not boosted yet, even though it was approved last week, is because last weekend I couldn't find anywhere in New York City that was, giving boosters to that age group. So,
Yeah.
so this is, and again, we are health literate people. And so, yeah, I agree. I think schools, I know at the beginning, once the vaccines were approved for children, there were buses and mobile units set up outside of my kids' schools. As school got out, kids could get their booster, get their vaccines. To me, that is just so simple and elegant solution. We just need to think of practically and use common sense.
I agree. And, when we talk about vaccines, the primary purpose is to prevent severe disease and death, but those aren't the only outcomes from SARS-CoV-2 either. Dr. Shapiro, can you speak to long COVID risks among kids, specifically 5 to 11-year-olds? This person said that there seems to be a lot through lots of downplaying of the risks of COVID in kids, given that they usually aren't that sick or are asymptomatic. So what are the concerns for the long term for this age group?
I will share what I have seen in clinics, hospitals here in California, and the stories that I have heard from other pediatricians across the country. There's this feeling where you get, yes, they were not as affected on the outside at the beginning as we were seeing with adults. And we carry that idea for months, and probably the 2 years that we have right now. But if you go to the hospitals at the peak moments, there's kids that are very, very sick there. And that I'm going to leave them on the side. And right now I'm going to talk about those that, thanks God, it's a big chunk of kiddos that they felt bad for a couple of days. They had a bad cough. They had fever, some diarrhea, and other stuff. They lost their smell, their taste. But mom and dad were like, we're done. It was like a bad cold. It was like the influenza stuff. But in reality, I'm starting to see a couple of kids that ended up having, the a lot of the MISC, the MISC C, multi-inflammatory syndromes. I'm seeing a lot of kids that are having chronic headaches. I'm starting to see other kids that suddenly they start having diabetes. Then other things that are part of this syndrome that we're telling that it's prolonged COVID. That's when you have symptoms more than 4 weeks after the initial infection was resolved, and you're carrying that burden of more than 50 symptoms that can happen to your child and to adults also. Then this is not a simple cold. This is something that I would not wish for my kid. And we have seen, with recent studies that if you have the vaccine and you kind of are keeping up with the boosters, the possibilities of having prolonged COVID decreases. Then we're seeing that part in that defense that yes, kids do way better than adults, and I hope that it stays that way, because I don't want to have a conversation in 2 months with the same with Dr. Blackstock and with you, Catalina, that kids are actually being harmed at the hospital because of COVID-19. But I hope it stays the same. But we still need to be worried about prolonged COVID, and also our little kiddos that have chronic diseases. Then we need to protect everybody. And I have heard a lot, I have seen a lot here in my clinic. 50% of the people that came in lost, because I was in the epicenter, the same thing as New York, in East LA, the epicenter of a lot of these infections. And I from the kids that I took care of, at least 50% had someone that directly ended up on the hospital, or someone died closely to them in the family. And those are the things that have been seen in the clinic, and that's the connection with prolonged COVID. And if we can avoid it, I will do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been difficult to, I will say, I'll put my epidemiology hat on to measure how often long COVID is happening among adults and among children, because the wide range of symptoms. Also, it's really difficult to get some sort of national data here in the United States still. And so it's just a question I don't want to go unanswered for my own kids. Like, I rather them be protected as possible. And if long COVID is higher or lower than it is, then so be it. But it is honest. It's a concern of mine. And as a parent, I don't want long COVID either. Okay. Is another question from the chat. Is there harm in spacing out doses? So say the kids have not had a primary series yet. They're getting their primary series this fall. It's never too late to start the primary series for your kids. Is there harm in spacing out the 2 doses? So for example, 12 weeks for the under 5-year-old group. This person has read that immunogenicity, so the immune system, is improved with this spacing. Dr. Blackstock, do you have any insights?
You probably would know better than me. I know that at least with Moderna, that's 2 doses. It's over 42 days. Actually 42 days. You should be immune by. But I don't know about 12 weeks. That seems like a lot of time. I know it wasn't studied, but I do know that there is literature showing that by spacing out vaccine doses, it can be sort of more effective. But I don't know if I would try that out with my own children.
So it can't. So you're right. So, and in fact, this is what the UK does, is they space their 2 doses of the primary series. I think it's 12 weeks. So maybe that's where this person's getting 12 weeks from. And it does help the longevity of your protection. But there's a reason I didn't do this with my girls, is because we're currently in a wave, right? I wanted them to get optimal protection as soon as possible. And really, the benefit of spacing may be a little, but it doesn't look like it like blows out of the water. And so that's kind of how I decided. I just decided to stick with schedule. I'll know how well these vaccines are working. And like you said, that's how they were tested in clinical trials as well. And so I feel a little more, I don't know, safer about that. Any thoughts, Dr. Shapiro?
I'm with you. Right now, I like to actually have numbers in my hands. I like to have volume in my hands. Then, it has been, more than 10, more on the thousands, tens of thousands of kids that have been tested and making sure that it's appropriate, safe, and effective. Then, when we start, spacing, and it could end up in 2 years, maybe we have the same reunion and we go like, oh, I remember that we talked about it. But right now, the data that we have, this is the safe and effective way to protect our kids. And I agree. And I want to follow that. That has been, the way that we have been living it. And most importantly, the way that it has been safe for our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Okay, this is for you doctors. This is not something that I could probably answer. What dangers do you see as we approach the flu season? So how can you tell the difference in COVID and simple flu in kids? And is it safe to vaccinate young ones for both? Dr. Blackstock, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, we're heading into that time of the year where there are a lot of fevers and upper respiratory symptoms like runny nose and cough. And I would say that in terms of like on the surface, it probably would be a little challenging for parents to differentiate, flu versus COVID. But what I would say is that's why we have, the rapid tests available that everyone should make sure that they stock up on just to be sure. But the other thing is that I would encourage, especially by the end of October, all parents to at least get the flu vaccine for their kids, even though, we haven't seen, what was the name of that entity? People were asking if you get infected with coronavirus and flu at the same time. Like that, I don't even know if that's ever happened. Yeah, Flurona. Like that is very, very unlikely if parents are worried about that. But I think obviously the safest thing is to get your kids vaccinated, and you can get them vaccinated against both at the same time. Obviously sometimes children will have post-vaccine symptoms like a headache or fatigue and just body aches. So you may want to you can separate it out from like by a week if that makes you feel more comfortable. But they can get both vaccines at the same time. That's not a problem.
And I'm a pediatrician. I love seeing my patients, and I love actually going to the pediatrician of my kiddos. But if I can do everything in one sitting, I will do it. That's the way that I got it. I got my influenza vaccine on one side, my COVID-19 vaccine on the other side. Same thing with my kids, with my wife. That way I'm done with it. You have the symptoms and it's real. Your body is actually reacting and learning how to protect itself. Redness, what exactly what Dr. Blackstock actually mentioned. But I prefer to do one round, 2 rounds.
I prefer that as a parent too. But I will say, also as a parent of 2 under 5, our kids are always sick, especially if they're in daycare. And to an extent, I'll use the antigen test to see perhaps if it's COVID-19 causing their fever or flu. But at the end of the day, it's not really going to change much of what I'm doing. I'm getting them vaccinated for both, and they're going to be staying home, most importantly, so they don't infect kids with whatever silly virus they have. And we'll help protect our healthcare systems that way too, to try and get this under control this winter.
Right. Well, and that's the other thing that I think we keep forgetting is that our healthcare system is so strained. Like, and really, this is for the public. It's so strained. Like, we're actually seeing very, very sick patients in general. People who had not followed up for their primary care, during most of the pandemic. And so, the healthcare system is overburdened. And so you can help do your part by getting vaccinated and getting your children vaccinated. That can help decrease the burden on our healthcare workers and the system.
Substantially too. I remember seeing models in a meeting I was, CDC models that showed like if we get COVID-19 vaccine across all people, about 70%, we can avert 100,000 deaths this winter and about 1 million hospitalizations. That's huge.
That is.
So everyone go get their booster.
I know. I know. Yeah, it feels so simple, but I know it's not.
No, it isn't. Absolutely not. So if we're talking about our fall boosters, I know one big concern for parents and just general population is that we kind of approached our COVID-19 fall boosters like we do with the flu every year, that we made decisions on very little data and we tried to predict where this virus is going. For example, for the B5 bivalent vaccines we're getting this fall, we relied on some mice data. We also relied on human data for the bivalent BA1 vaccine. Do you guys know if there's going to be updates on vaccine performance and updated efficacy of these updated boosters, and when maybe we would ever see that data?
Historically, it takes like 3 to 4 months to get those data points, and it's from a small group that they are already following to make sure that we are, that's our true north, and also the data that we're getting from other systems that are feeding to the CDC and HHS. Then I hope, and the reality is that you need to have an increased caseload to actually understand what's happening there on the community. Then my best bet, and this is based on Shapiro-Landia, it's not based on anything else. That's my opinion, and I'm not even putting the expert opinion. It's my personal opinion. I think that by February we'll have a big chunk of a lot of ideas. We will know what's happening with the vaccines. We will know what's the rate of protection. How long do we need to spread the boosters? If we need to repeat it once a year, twice a year, then we'll have a lot of answers because it will be kind of, we have the control group that was 2020 that we didn't have any vaccines, 2021 that we started to have vaccines, and right now that we're full on, at least with adults. And sadly, I agree with you, Dr. Blackstock. It's horrible to see the numbers that we're having with kids, because a lot of my parents were crying that they couldn't get the vaccine because it was not even existed for their ages. And right now that we're having it, everybody's waiting. And it's not that they don't like it or they're just waiting and seeing that, as we saw it at the beginning. Then I hope that by February 2023, we will have an answer.
It'll be interesting because actually, like, historically, we've relied on like the UK and Israel for their vaccine effectiveness data because we just don't have the data in the United States. And they're rolling out another vaccine than we are. It's slightly different. And so I'm very curious, actually, when we'll be getting the data. But you're right, Dr. Shapiro. I think it's about in February when we usually get the flu data of how well our flu vaccine was working. So maybe it'll be about the same time. But I will say we've seen already lab studies on humans showing that the booster vaccines broaden the protection of our immune system. So our immune system can recognize more parts of the virus and attach more strongly than if we didn't have this fall booster, which is really great news. And it also shows that we don't have this thing called implanting, which is also great news. But I guess we're going to wrap up. But before I do, Dr. Blackstock and Dr. Shapiro, any final words of wisdom for our parents and our communities?
Yeah, I just want to tell the parents, if you have, more questions and concerns after, today's session, to definitely reach out to your child's pediatrician or their healthcare professional with those questions. And, we understand that for many of you, this is a very, very big decision. But I hope that the conversation that we've had today can provide you at least with some layer of reassurance that, these vaccines, are safe and effective, can really protect your children against, getting very, very sick. And so we hope that you will, consider that, or at the very least, engage with your pediatrician and talk to them or any other person that's a trusted healthcare professional in your life.
On my side, I'm going to end up in Spanish. Familia, este es el momento que se vale tener miedo, se vale tener preocupaciones, pero el hecho de esperar no nos está llevando a nada. En este momento tenemos que tener la información en nuestras manos, buscar la información real, verídica, que no sea de chismes, para poder asegurarnos que estamos haciendo lo mejor para nuestra familia y asegurarnos que aquí estamos. Vamos a seguir. Queremos tener un diciembre increíble con la familia y que nos podamos disfrutar. Family, this is the moment that it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to have questions, but just waiting, it's not the answer. We are not in 2020. We're not in 2021. We're in 2022, where we have evidence-based information and a lot of millions of kids that have been vaccinated. And that feeling of being afraid has not worked. The thing that has worked was when we actually put the vaccines and we decrease the amount of kids that are suffering or preventing prolonged COVID. That's why I actually vaccinated my kids. And the phrase that I love saying, that we need to continue vaccinating against fear with a dose of truth.
Thank you. You know, this landscape has been incredibly difficult for parents, including myself, to navigate. And so thank you, Dr. Shapiro. Thank you, Dr. Blackstock, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for your amazing questions as well. This recording will be available, I'm told, on, I think, all networks, all social channels. The other thing that we're doing is this new Boost Your Knowledge interactive game. And we invite people to play and share their results at covidvaccineproject.org. Be well, be safe, and have a wonderful fall and winter season. Thank you, everyone.